Good morning. Hope all you people are well and happy. I've come to tell you a little Halloween story. This happened several years ago. I'll call out some dates as we go along, but it's been more than 60 years ago, and I was a great big kid then, so that kind of tells you about it. But main thing I want to remind you is try to have a safe Halloween. Be very careful. There's lots of dangers, of course, the COVID, and there's always other dangers too on Halloween, so be very careful. But have a safe Halloween and have a good one too. The story I'm going to tell you, I call it Patan's Pumpkin Patch. It involves an old man, Patan. He lived in Louisiana. He was probably a Cajun. I'm not sure about that, but he was living in a Cajun community. But none of the people around there had much use for him. Give you just a little background on this. The lady that I talk about in the story, that I'll call Ma, was a Cajun lady. Her name was actually Marcelina Saunier. Now they pronounce words a little different to what we do. Saunier is actually, if we read it and didn't know it was a Cajun word, you'd call it Sauniers. But it's Saunier. She was originally from the city of Thibodaux, Louisiana. She married at the age of 12, and she moved from there to New Iberia. At the age of 19, with 7 children, her husband was killed in a dispute over a property line. The next year, after the dispute, she moved to the city of Jeanrette. It's spelled Jeannerette, and I would call that Generetti, but they call it Jeanrette. She moved to Jeanrette, and she lived there a short time, and then she married a man from the town of Sunset. She moved there. She had 12 more children, and G.M. Petro was one of her grandchildren. He was G.M. Petro Kershaw. His daddy was Joel, only they didn't say Joel, they said Joel. His father was Joel Kershaw. G.M. Petro had the nickname Pedro. He was her 37th grandchild out of 52. So Ma Saunier had quite a family. 19 children and 52 grandchildren, and I don't know how many great-grandchildren because I lost touch of them a few years after this story. My dad, as I've told you before, was a Baptist preacher. Sometime in the summer of 1956, he was called to come for a preacher revival in Sunset, Louisiana, a Baptist church down there. My mother couldn't go, and he took me along. I always knew that he took me along. I was 10 years old at the time, and he took me along with him in case he had a flat tire. So had somebody to change that tire. Yes, I had no illusions about why I was along, but Mother packed a bag for me, and here we go off on our revival trip, and we get to the village of Sunset. And first night at the church, I see this guy. He looks to be about my age. He's quite a bit shorter than me, but he's a husky-built guy. And most of the people in the town of Sunset were Cajun. Very happy people. Everybody played some kind of musical instrument. But the church, their music was very lively. It was fun to go to church there. But this kid that I'm talking about come over and introduced himself. And there was a short lady that I thought might be his mother. They favored a lot. Turned out it was his grandmother. She was kind of along with him, and he told me his name was Pedro Saunier, or Pedro Kershaw, pardon me. Whereupon the lady said, "Your name is G.M. Petro, not Pedro." And kind of pulled his ear a little bit as she said that. So I saw right off I was going to like him because I usually got in that kind of trouble too about something. We became good friends. That whole week we sat together at church, and I came to about third day of the revival. He said, "Why don't you stay over at our house instead of where you're staying?" I said, "I'll get Ma to ask your dad if you can stay with us." So did, and then we roamed. There was a small river. They called it a river. It was really more of a creek. Had swampy places in it, but we roamed all over that whole week. He constantly cautioned me about cottonmouth snakes. Well, I was used to rattlesnakes and copperheads up where I lived in Alabama, but I was cautious. We didn't get bit, but there was several little roads around there, and we'd walk those roads. And one road, there was an old house. And he told me, "You don't ever go to that house. That's Patan." I said, "Who's Patan?" "He's a haint. He talks to spirits. You don't ever go around Patan." And he had something growing. I thought it was some type of gourd there in a patch there by his house. And I asked Pedro, I said, "What's he growing gourd?" "No, that's pumpkins. That's young pumpkins. They're green yet, but they'll turn yellow pretty soon." Okay. Well, as luck would have it, we go back home. Pedro sends me a card or two along. I send him a card or two. And Dad gets called for another revival down there. The pastor of another church down there had come over to Sunset to the revival, and he liked the way Dad preached, and he called him. And Dad was to go back for a week in October. The last week of October. Halloween fell in that week. And so we were going to be, Dad was going to go down there. Well, Mama couldn't go again. So Dad talked to my school teacher and to the principal at the school, and they said, "Yeah, be all right for him to go." So I go back. Well, we're staying over in this other little town, but Ma Sonia has already sent word for me to come and stay with them. So I go and stay with them. Well, she lets Pedro hang out of school some that week too. We have a lot of adventures, but he tells me, now Halloween night, Ma won't go to church Halloween night because there's too many spooks around here and Halloweenies, and she's afraid they'll break out her windows or something. And she won't go to church that night. We'll go trick-or-treating, but I've got a special thing planned. We'll raid old man Patan's pumpkin patch. All right, I couldn't wait. So we head out. Halloween night comes, and Ma is sitting in the kitchen. We get ready to go, and we've taken some crayons and made some marks on our faces because we didn't have any masks. But she said, "Don't you boys go over around Patan's. He's got tatais over there. Don't go over around Patan's. Tatais will get you." Her father was blind. He sat on the porch. I don't know when he went to bed because he was always sitting on the porch when we went to bed, and he was sitting there when we got up most of the time. He had a cane, and he would get up and walk out in the yard and come back. He was quite elderly. We'd come out on the porch, but anytime anybody came on that porch, he knew who it was, even though he was blind. "Okay, Pedro, John, don't go to Patan's. Whatever you do, don't go to Patan's. There's tatais over there. Tatais will get you." Well, I can't wait till we get out of the yard, and I say, "What is a tatai?" Pedro tells me it's kind of a Cajun boogeyman, something they scare children with, but they ain't no such thing. I'm not worried about them. Let's go. So we go down at the fire hall, there right in the middle of town, there's a fire hall. The firemen it was warm that night, and they're sitting outside there in front of the building under the lights, playing cards. There's about 5 of them there. They see us coming by. Oh, there comes the Halloweenies. They've got a sack of candy, and they give us some candy. We thank them. As we're walking off, an older man in the group says, "Hey, boy, don't go up there toward Patans now. The ties will get you." Of course, we knew better. So we loop around so they won't anybody realize where we're going. And we come down there, and there's not a light anywhere on Patan's house. And between the pumpkin patch and the road, there's a real deep gully, like it's deep. Be over my head even now. It's probably 10 feet deep in the middle, but it come down and back up. Well, we go around the other end of that from the house and slip up in there. And Pedro tells me, instead of us stealing any pumpkins, what we'll do, we'll just cut some Halloween faces in them, jack-o'-lanterns, and we'll make old man Patan think they've grown like that, scare him. So we get out there. Pedro don't scare easily about anything. I had never seen him even act the least bit afraid of anything. We saw a pretty good-sized alligator one day in the river, and he got up close to it, a lot closer than I wanted to. He just don't scare easily. He takes the first pumpkin, big one that he comes to, and he starts to turn it a little bit, and he jumps back. Whoa. What is it, Pedro? Somebody's already made a face on this one. And I look, and sure enough, there is a face on that pumpkin. But it's looking at us. I can tell it's looking at me. It's not just a face somebody's cut in there. It's like it's grown in there. And it's looking really stern. I glance over to another one. It's looking too. All of them. And they start moving and kind of ganging up around us. Well, I think, I'm glad I've got Pedro with me because he's not afraid of anything. Nope. Pedro said, we better run. Well, we ran for the gully, and sure enough, all them pumpkins takes off after us. Hundreds of them. Well, we run down in the gully, and here they come right on over the top. Well, we run up the other side. They roll down this side, across the bottom, and they roll up the other side, but they don't hardly get all the way to the top. And they roll back down. But they go up the other side. And after about the third time, we realize they're coming a little higher up every time. They're gaining momentum. Pedro says, they fixing to top out here on us, John. We better make some tracks. And boy, we took out running, and it sounded like they were behind us. I don't know if they were or not, but it sounded like they were. And we ran as hard as we could run, and we were running, and we rounded the corner, and there was the fire hall, and those men were sitting there. And I don't know what Pedro said, because it was in Cajun. But I did pick up the word Patan and the word tatais, pumpkins, in his soliloquy that he gave them. They jumped to their feet. They didn't ask any questions. They jumped to their feet. They ran in the firehouse, and they came back with those old big fireman's axe, with the axe blade on one side and that sharp point on the other, and they started running up that road hard as they could go with those axes. Well, if the pumpkins had come on into the road, they heard these men coming and got back into the patch, but they run right up through that gully and right up into the patch, and they began to chop up those pumpkins. And they chopped them up, and the vines and everything, and they was throwing them into a pile. And when they got them all chopped up, they set fire to them. Now, a fireman knows how to build a fire. I mean, they had a roaring fire going there in a little while, and the pumpkins. But while it was burning, you could hear it was like voices way off. Ooh, spooky sounding. They burned it completely up. Old man Patan was never seen after that day. Some say that tatais got him. Some say he was a tatai, that he burned up when they burned the pumpkins. I don't know, but I know Even though I was back down to see Pedro again after that, we never went up that road again. That was enough for us. Thank you.